broadcast on multifamily. I don't know if you all remember me. My name is Ashley Wilson. I previously was doing live content for BiggerPockets, and I'm back. I'm excited to be back and covering multifamily once again. And this time we're going to go into a deep dive into multifamily. We're going to cover all different types of topics from selecting a market, how to network with brokers, how to close a property, how to pick which market is most advantageous for you to do. And tonight we're covering why multifamily. We have to start off at the very beginning and get a good foundation so we can build on our knowledge. So as we get started tonight, I want you to type in where you're from. Let me know, where are you guys listening from? Are you listening from the East Coast? I'm from outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so I want to know where you're from. Our current properties are all over the country. We have some properties in Texas and Ohio. So looking forward to hearing where you are all from. I see someone is from Chicago. Pretty awesome. I've been there and it's a beautiful city. Absolutely love Chicago. Great city, great people. So hi, welcome, and thanks for letting me know. New Jersey, Chad, welcome. Great to see you here too as well. It's nice to see someone so close to Philadelphia. So welcome. We also have people from Vancouver. That's awesome. Way to go, Canada. My husband's Canadian, so huge fan of Canadians, and thank you so much for joining tonight. Matt and Liz Bearclock, thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm so happy you guys are here, and big shout out to Matt and Liz. They have given me so much support, prepping me for tonight, so I provide the best content for you guys. And I really hope you enjoy what I have prepared for tonight on our journey into multifamily. So I want to take a brief moment and just ask if you could kindly like, share, subscribe, do what you do to bring this to more people so we can build more people's knowledge and get everyone on the path to financial freedom, because honestly, that's why we all invest in real estate, right? That's why I invest in real estate. I want to spend more time with my family. I'm sure that's what part of your journey is. You might like to travel. You might like to spend time with your family. You might just want out of your W-2. I get all of that. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will continue bringing you amazing content on multifamily. Just to get started, I wanted to also mention that all of this information that I'm providing to you is my own personal opinion. I highly advise you to seek the advice from a qualified CPA, a certified public accountant. They will guide you in the appropriate direction when you're considering investing in real estate. You should never just take anyone's word as absolute truth. You need to seek your CPA to help guide you on the right path. So that is no different for me. So please take my advice and seek out a CPA. And I hope you like the knowledge that I'm going to be providing tonight. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be covering all different types of topics in multifamily. Like I mentioned previously, I'm going to be covering tonight why multifamily. We're going to also dive into, on subsequent weeks, we're going to cover content like what markets should you look to and why should you select certain markets over other markets, building a team, networking with brokers, how to find the appropriate property that you're looking to build your financial freedom with. So there's all different types of things. That's what I love about multifamily. It's very creative. It has so many different intricacies that makes it a very interesting investment. So I encourage you to join me on this journey. And also during the next few weeks, I have a property under contract currently, and I'm going to be taking you step by step with me as I close on this property. So you're going to see firsthand through video content. We're going to walk the property. We're going to get an insider's look on actually closing a large multifamily complex. And I think that in itself is going to provide enough entertainment for all of us over the next coming weeks. I don't even know if I need to prepare because I'm sure the content will just show up at my doorstep on that. So without further ado, let's get into multifamily. Let's get into the definition of multifamily. So before we start, let's start with what is multifamily. Multifamily is a class of real estate where multiple, i.e., multi people, i.e., family, inhabit a single dwelling. And dwellings or a complex is often referred to as units. Depending on the number of units, it changes the term that people refer to as the property. So, for example, a 2-unit property is called a duplex, a 3-unit property is called a triplex, a 4-unit property is called a quad, and quite typically after, or quadruplex, quite typically after 4 units, it gets referred to by the number of units. So let's say, for example, someone says, I have a 130 unit property. They're referring to a multifamily property that has 130 different units in that property. It could be all contained within one building or it could be in multiple buildings. That's another interesting fact about multifamily. It does not necessarily have to be contained within, 4 walls. So let's dive in. I have prepared some slides for all of you on why I personally like multifamily. And we can always go over the common things that everyone refers to in multifamily when they talk about multifamily, which is concerning cash flow, and multifamily pays down your mortgage, and there are obvious major tax advantages. But I wanted to cover something a little bit more than just the low hanging fruit, so to speak. So let's start at the very top, and it's something that people often talk about in multifamily, and that's people always need a place to live. We have a housing shortage across the country, and that is not limited to single family. That is inclusive of single family and multifamily. People needing a place to live will never change. It's like food, it's a necessity of life. So for that reason, I really enjoy investing in multifamily because we know the underlying problem, so to speak, and that's what businesses do. They solve problems. The underlying problem is that we have a housing shortage. So multifamily solves the housing shortage crisis through new construction, through additions on existing properties. In the end, it solves the problem that we currently face today, and we will continue to face moving forward in the future. It is a real estate backed asset. So, what do I mean by that if you haven't heard this term before? A real estate backed asset is an investment in which there is a tangible substance behind the investment. It is not based on speculation. At the end of the day, if, God forbid, if the apartment complex was to burn down, you still have the actual land, the real estate. So that's what is also intriguing to me because unlike stocks, which we could get into a whole discussion on that, and I'm sure everyone has their own opinion on it. For me personally, I like investing in real estate backed assets. Next is I tend to think of multifamily as a business. Multifamily is both the real estate and the business. And what's interesting about looking at it as a two-pronged approach is that a business, you can control your income. And the way multifamilies are evaluated is based on what's considered your net operating income, often referred to as NOI. We're going to cover that in future episodes, so don't get hung up on the term if you haven't heard of it now. Just know that there's a way in which you can control your evaluation or the value of your property in multifamily that you cannot do on the single family side in terms of, for example, flipping. Flipping, if you flip a house, it's based on a comparable property selling. In multifamily, you can actually control the valuation. So just to recap these 3 things, we have people always need a place to live, and I actually have some other highlights to talk about that, which is that CNBC just last year found out that millennials are renting longer than they ever have before. And it's not because of the cost of purchasing a house, it's It's actually because they enjoy renting. They enjoy renting because it gives them the flexibility to change jobs and move and relocate on a moment's notice as opposed to selling a property, putting it for sale, getting it ready for sale. They also don't like the maintenance of home ownership, so they're more inclined to rent, and they're living in apartment complexes. And if you look at the other end of the spectrum, the other bookend that I like to say is if you look at baby boomers accounted for more than 30% of rental housing, according to a 2017 survey in the National Housing Council and National Apartment Association study that was done on the diversification of housing in multifamily. So people need a place to live. We see two opposite ends of the spectrum. It's a real estate backed asset, it's a tangible asset. And then further, it's a business. You're investing in both the real estate and you're investing in the business. So, for those three reasons alone, I like real estate. But wait, there's more. What's great about multifamily is there is an aspect of economies of scale. Economies of scale can happen on so many levels in multifamily that you can't really find on the single family side, or at least they're not as obvious and not as prevalent. And economies of scale on the multifamily side, you can realize it through management, operations, construction management, and you get these economies of scale through volume discounts because on large multifamily properties, if you have a contractor come in and you say, I need 50 units renovated, they're going to give you a discount because they only have to mobilize their team once. They only have to deliver supplies once. They only have to account for all the materials once. Whereas opposed if you had 50 single family houses spread out throughout a market, they have to change their team and move them to different locations, make sure the materials are at different locations. There is more management and overhead when you are not located at a single location that large multifamily properties provide. So that's just one example of economies of scale. Next reason I like multifamily is due to the track record. For the track record, specifically, a interesting metric is in 2018, CBRE, which is the world's largest commercial real estate firm, released data showing that multifamily over the period of 1992 to 2017 provided the highest total annual average return of 9.75% across all multifamily properties, with the second lowest volatility at 7.75%. So, in terms of it being a safer investment in the commercial space with a high return, if you look at both the return and the safety of the investment, clearly together as a package, it provides a very strong case for investing in multifamily in the commercial space. With respect to purchasing power, loans might be bigger, and that tends to scare off a lot of people. But the ability to get a loan and the rate in which you get the loans are more favorable than single family. And that was really surprising to me at first. I don't know if you guys think that that's surprising, but to me, I would think that a bank would be more cautious to loan on a 200 or $300 million property. They would be more cautious about lending on that than they would a $200 or $300,000 property, or $200 and $300,000 property compared to a $20 million property. But what's interesting is that the large loans can be potentially backed by government-backed loans. So these government-backed loans tend to secure lower interest rates, and they don't they're often not loans that have recourse. On single family, loans can be written in which they can come after you as the individual if you are to default. On large multifamily, you can get what's called non-recourse loans, and therefore you do not have personal liability should you default on a loan. That was a very interesting thing that I learned very early on in multifamily that kind of was like the aha moment for me where the light bulb turned on and I said, wow, That's really the power of leverage, that you are leveraging the bank's ability to fund larger investments. So that to me, I found very intriguing. I don't know if you feel the same way, but you can sound off if you do. But I thought to myself, if I invest in single family properties and I want 100 properties, I'm going to have a limit. I'm going to face a certain wall as compared to when I would seek 100 unit property. So in terms of the unit count, they're the same, but in terms of the bank size, they look at 100 single families and they're looking at my W-2, my credit score. And on the multifamily, they're not looking at that. They're looking at a whole host of other underwriting guidelines that they use to determine the risk level that I, as an investor, have on the property. One thing that's very interesting about that, if you want to dive into it a little bit deeper, is single family by definition can be a residential property or it can be an income producing property, as we often like to look at it, as a rental. Multifamily in the eyes of a lender is a rental property. It is a business. Single family can go either way. So that's another huge difference when lenders are looking at whether or not to loan on a single family versus a multifamily. And therefore, banks see that the multifamily properties have the opportunity of being a successful running business. And on the single family side, it's still questionable. It's just one of the things that they're considering when they're underwriting. But still, the fact remains that the power is in the ability to leverage the bank's money. Just think about this. Leveraging the bank's money helps you invest further faster. Just keep that in mind. So one other thing I wanted to mention is that multifamily tends, what I said earlier, tends to have the lowest interest rates compared to other commercial loans, but they also have the highest loan to value at 67 versus 65% and a lower debt coverage ratio of 1.25 versus 1.75, which the bank requires. So in terms of other commercial assets, they're requiring a lower debt coverage ratio at that 1.25 rate. And like I said at the very beginning, before we went into this slide, there are the obvious reasons that people go into multifamily. There are reasons you've probably heard of before, which is the cash flow, paying down your mortgage, and of course, tax advantages, which we all know. So, taking this one step further, I think I've already hinted at the fact that there is a difference between single family and multifamily, but let's break it down one step further here. So I put together this chart for you to really see the difference between large multifamily and single family. So let's start with total rent. On a large multifamily property, you're getting a high rent because you have multiple units in a multifamily. Whereas if you look at a single family property, you're only getting one rent per unit. So in terms of the actual acquisition of the property to property comparison, you have more units in the large multifamily property, obviously, than you're going to have in the single family. And that directly ties into the total rent that's collected. In terms of turnover, large multifamily, the national average is 50% turnover rate, which means when a lease comes up for renewal, you have a 50% chance that the tenant will stay on the property, and you have a 50% chance that the tenant will vacate. So they're either going to stay at the property or they're going to leave. This varies by market. Everything I will tell you varies by market and varies by property and varies by asset manager and varies by property manager. There are a lot of factors that come into play, but ultimately across the country, there is an average rate of turnover on large multifamily at a 50% ratio. So this is a mid turnover. It is not very high. It's not very low. It's a very consistent turnover rate that we have seen across many years. Obviously, during COVID, it has changed a little bit because the feasibility of moving hasn't been so easy to do as it has been historically. But there's still going to probably average out around a little bit higher than, or excuse me, a little bit less than 50% this year, just because COVID prevented so many people from renewing, or excuse me, from leaving the property. On the single family side, single family people actually tend to stay a little bit longer than on multifamily, because it's a single family house. It's normally a someone who wants to stay in a single family house. So it could be a family, it could be a couple of people living together, roommates. There's a lot of different reasons someone would rent a single family house. But in terms of the turnover, we see a little bit of a differential between the single family and large multifamily properties. In terms of R&M, so what does R&M stand for? R&M stands for repairs and maintenance. On large multifamily, you have a high cost of R&M because you have such a big building and you're covering general maintenance throughout the property across so many different units. On the single family side, it is a lower cost than the large multifamily, but I wouldn't say it's low. In terms of, if the roof needs a repair, not a roof replacement, but if a roof needs a repair, the repair and maintenance cost is going to be high, because in terms of the income that you're collecting, only one person in the property is offsetting that repair and maintenance costs, as opposed to a large multifamily where you have multiple units offsetting your repair and maintenance costs. In terms of resale value versus ease of sale, resale value on large multifamily is high. And this is because of what I alluded to earlier on being able to force the appreciation on your property and force the overall value. In terms of ease of sale, it is hard to sell a large multifamily. You don't have as many people looking for large multifamilies as you do single family properties. So we get back to basic economics of supply and demand. When you have not even consistent supply in this situation, but you have low demand, your prices will drive down. When you have low supply, which recently multifamily has not had as much supply as there's been demand pre-COVID, then that's when you see the prices start to escalate. On the single family side, the resale value is not as high on the multifamily. It's definitely lower, but in terms of ease of sale, it is very easy if you're talking about a single transaction. But one thing to keep in mind is selling 100 single family homes is a lot harder than selling one 100 unit apartment building. So just for, if you have kind of a roadblock saying, I really understand the single family rental side, but I don't understand the large multifamily. Educate yourself, learn the things that you fear, face those fears, because ultimately you might be working harder on the single family side than you are on the multifamily side. In terms of loans, large multifamily, I covered this earlier. They're easier to get loans. On the single family, it varies. They're looking at your credit, they're looking at your W-2. There's a lot of different reasons why loans could vary on the single family side. In terms of vacancy, large multifamilies tend to have the lower vacancy versus single family. In single family, you either have a tenant in the property or you don't. In terms of barrier to entry, large multifamily, it's a high barrier to entry because it requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of teamwork to take down a large multifamily property. It's not impossible, but it takes more pieces working together. On a single family property, though, you could take it down yourself pretty easily. So before we go on to the next slide, I am just interested to hear from you. Who is currently investing in multifamily? who has properties under contract right now, who is interested in getting into multifamily. If you could take a minute and type in and let me know what you have, what you're interested in, this would be really helpful because I want to provide the best content for you so you can take action. Or if you have already started your journey in multifamily, I want to help you get to the next level. So, while we have people typing in, I am going to actually, we have someone right away. We have someone, Kate. One multi and looking at another right now. Way to go, Kate. So I am like Kate. I am not turned off by COVID in terms of looking at multifamily properties right now. I think it's still an excellent time. It obviously varies by market and what types of properties, but I am still very hungry on multifamily too. I see James, you're interested in multifamily too. Excellent, James. Where do you begin? You start now. You start with all of this knowledge and you build on the knowledge and you build your team and you start growing your business so you can tackle these large multifamily properties. Prentice, you are interested in multifamily properties in Detroit, Michigan, where I'm from. That is awesome. We are going to be covering in the future weeks on market selection. Some people like to invest in large multifamilies close to home so they can go and see it and work on the properties. And other people like to work in different markets. There's no right or wrong answer. So we're going to be covering that very shortly in the coming weeks. Please stay tuned for that. So I want to talk briefly on something that maybe not a lot of people know about, but make multifamily a very lucrative business as well. So most people think of multifamily being very lucrative on the sales side, but there are actually 4 days of paydays, a 4-day payday with multifamily. So let's go through it. The most obvious is cash flow. Cash flow, everyone knows about cash flow because it comes in through your monthly rental income. Your tenants are paying, you cover your bills and expenses, and then what's left over, that's called cash flow. And people think of this as one way in which they're making money on multifamily, and then the second being the sale, but they forget all of these other factors that contribute to multifamily, which make multifamily a very strong investment. The next one is equity growth. So equity growth is, by definition, loan pay down. So you have a mortgage on your multifamily and your rental income is helping pay down that loan. And then that obviously increases the appreciation that you have in your property, the equity that you have in your property. Excuse me, I used the wrong term. The equity you have in your property because you're paying down your mortgage. And then most often you have appreciation of the asset, and that comes in 2 fashions. That comes in either forced appreciation, which we talked briefly about. We're going to cover that on a future episode. And then there's also natural appreciation, which is what people tend to think of more often than not. And that's just general appreciation in the markets. So when property values start to raise naturally, that's a natural appreciation, where forced appreciation is what I was talking about earlier and how it relates to your net operating income, which we'll cover later. So just stay tuned, come back next week, and we will continue the topic. Tax benefits is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but the Jobs Act has changed the whole landscape of making this a good investment to a great investment. So one thing that you can do with multifamily is you can depreciate your cost on certain things in the multifamily property. This is often referred to as doing a cost segregation. This is a little bit more detailed than we're going to go into tonight. We're going to cover this on a future episode, but just know that you can write off your expenses and write them off against your income, against your gains. You can find out more information on this by either talking to a certified CPA who can help you understand the benefits of a cost segregation study. And there are also companies that specifically do cost segregation reports for you, and then you can have the company work side by side with your CPA to realize those gains. Another tax benefit is doing what's called a 1031 exchange. That's another topic that we're going to get into a little bit later. But what in essence, it does, it allows you to defer paying taxes on your gains by using the gains to reinvest in another asset. So at sale, you would have to take the gains and then put it into a new asset, which allows you a higher purchasing power, because if you didn't have the 1031 exchange option, you would obviously be paying taxes. You would have less money than to use to purchase a new asset. So this defers your taxes. There is a catch-up period at some point. We can cover all this at another time, but I'm just telling you that that is another benefit that not a lot of people talk about, but is a huge benefit to investing in multifamily. And then there are the fees. I wish there was like dramatic music, because that's really what it is. The fees, there are so many fees that can be captured on large multifamily, and that is through the art of syndication. So with fees, you can charge in syndication acquisition fees, disposition fees. So acquisition at purchase, you can charge as an active investor to your passive investors fees for all of the sweat equity you have just put into securing the property. Disposition, the opposite. When you go to sell the property or another capital event, or refinance, some syndicators put in a refinance fee for putting together all of the documents and all of the, going through the whole process with the lender to refinance out of a previous loan. There are also asset management fees for doing all of the operations of running the property. There are construction management fees. There is also a mortgage brokerage fee. If you want to self-manage, which not a lot of people do on the large multifamily until they get a huge portfolio, and then they'll typically bring in a whole self-managed property management team in-house. But you could also charge property management fees. There are so many ways in which you can be paid, but collectively, I like to group them all into fees. So if you guys aren't enticed enough, or if you are enticed and you want to learn more, I'm going to do a little preview of what we have coming up in the future weeks. So next week, I'm going to be talking about building out your team. Large multifamily is not a sport like golf or tennis. It is a team sport. And there are a lot of different players that really contribute to the overall success of taking down a large multifamily property. And there is no one on the team whose position is less valuable than someone else's. Everyone provides equal value to multifamily. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because each one of you has a strength. And what you want to do is identify that strength, leverage that strength by partnering with someone who has a strength that is your weakness, so that you guys can come together and have a really strong team to take down multifamily. So I'm going to go into that in more detail on next week's series, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Make sure you join. The following week, we're going to cover market selection. We are going to talk about what to look for in a market, what indicators show you that a market is somewhere where you want to go versus ones that you might want to steer away from. I'm not saying that there are markets that you can't make money in, and that's the beauty of real estate. You can make money in any market, but there are certain things that you want to include in your underwriting and provisions and safeguards that you put in place to ensure that you know the risk of investing in certain markets versus another. Teaser: if you invest in a market that is their income is driven by tourism, you might want to put in certain provisions in case, I don't know, a pandemic happens and people can't travel to that market. Just an example. We'll cover that more. So stay tuned. And then sourcing deals. So the last week of June, we'll be covering how to source deals. Where do you find these properties? There is no MLS. I mean, some people will argue there is an equivalent, but it is not the same. On single family, on residential property, MLS is the go-to source. Large multifamily, we don't have that resource. So, how do you find these multifamily properties? I'm going to cover all of that and more on June 30th. Now, before I close out, I just want to let you know that I think reading, listening to podcasts, surrounding yourself with brilliant, smart people is the fastest way to ensure success. And I want to recommend one book every week that ties into what I'm talking about so you can surround yourself with knowledge and wisdom from experienced multifamily investors. This week, I would like to recommend Crushing It by Brian Murray. Brian is a good friend of mine, and he is a phenomenal investor. Probably if you are following Brandon Turner, you have seen him on their Open Door Capital all over the place because they are literally crushing it with mobile home parks. So Brian's book on crushing it for the apartment and commercial real estate, this book, the reason why I like this book is because it is a really good book on telling you what it's like to own commercial properties, apartment buildings. He has a terrific chapter on creative financing, one of the best that I've read, to be honest with you. He's very, very good at integrating different concepts on how to get really creative on structuring debt and equity on a multifamily acquisition, on any commercial acquisition for that matter. So if you have yet to read this book, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy, do some reading this week, and learn all from Brian Murray on his experiences in multifamily. Before I open up for questions, I just want to say if you want to follow me, make sure to go to Instagram, and you can follow me at Badash Investor. And I post everything on multifamily and all different types of real estate on that page as well. So I welcome you to join me there. Post questions. I am very active on Instagram, and I will get to as many questions as I possibly can. But if you like what you're hearing, if you like this whole episode, please remember to like, share, and make sure you tune in next Tuesday when we go a little bit deeper. And we are going to continue going deeper each week so we cover all aspects of multifamily. So with that, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to open it up for any questions that you all have, and let's build knowledge together and really secure our financial future together. So thank you so much. Do we have any questions? I see a question from Kate. Will you do one on running the numbers? Yes, I will. I will be doing an episode on underwriting and how to underwrite multifamily properties. It is going to be very detailed. So make sure to tune in every single week, because what I'm doing now is laying the foundation so it's easier to understand when we get to the underwriting stage, that we can really dive in and understand where these numbers are coming from, why you have to account for certain things. So this is going to be covered and so much more. Thank you so much, Kate, for the question. Really appreciate it. What's the best way to get started with multifamily on a small scale? Excellent question. So with multifamily, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there are duplexes, triplexes, quads, so 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, and so many variations all the way up to hundreds of units. If you want to start with a duplex, there's a lot of different ways in which you can start. You can either do what's called a house hack, which is you live in one unit and you rent out the other unit. You could purchase the property and rent out both units. But if you want to start on a small scale, figure out what the rate limiter is. Is the rate limiter that you don't have the time to fix up the property and you want to go after a property that you can fix up, buy rehab rent, refinance, repeat, which Brandon Turner coined the term BRRRR strategy. You can do something like that. You can buy a quad and still go under residential financing. That's also a smaller scale type investment. There's a lot of different ways in which you can get your feet wet with multifamily. Some multifamily mentors like to advise or coach on the plan of doubling. So if you start with a duplex, then you go to a quad, then you go to an 8 unit and a 16 unit. And the whole idea is every single acquisition, you're doubling your unit count. So you're building it up that way. So that's one way you can go about it as well. Thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate it. What are the steps or areas a newly investor can do to improve to get approved? So with respect to the large multifamily, you have the power of partnering with people who may have already done some big deals and gotten Fannie and Freddie loans. And those are the people who in the industry, we call they have their gold card, which means that Fannie and Freddie tend to lend to people who already have done Fannie and Freddie loans. So you want to partner with someone like that when tackling large multifamily properties and going after a Fannie or Freddie loan. If you're talking about a smaller scale multifamily, if you're talking about a duplex, a triplex, a quad, there's a lot of different ways in which you can get financing to secure the property. One way is that you could try to position your offer for seller financing. So you can search for properties in which the current seller owns the property free and clear. And then what you would do is position your offer in a way that you could put down a certain down payment that you can negotiate with a seller, and then have payments as if the seller were the bank. And that's what they're operating as in that scenario. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can get creative on the financing side, but ultimately partnering in multifamily is a sure way to make sure that you cover all of your bases. So whatever you need support with, make sure you partner with someone who already has that strength. And then you provide value by showing what your strength is. Maybe your strength is construction management, and their strength is the ability to get loans. That would be a really good opportunity to look into seeing whether or not you guys fit, personality wise, etc., all the different things that make up a great partnership, and then tackle a property together because you have different strengths. Remember, it's a team sport. So you don't want a team full of all goalies and no goal scorers. You need a balanced team. You need people who can score goals. You need people who can play defense, and you need goalies to make sure that you really put the puzzle together. You also need coaches, trainers. We're going to get into all of that. But the point is that really make sure to partner with people that provide a strength that you don't currently possess. Thank you again for the question, James. How do I feel about out-of-state real estate investings? I'm in the military and I'm trying to figure out how to start. First of all, Conquer, thank you so much for your service. We really appreciate it. I know I speak on behalf of everyone here on the call tonight. So thank you so much again for your service. For out-of-state real estate investing, I actually got started flipping houses while living in Europe, and I flipped houses in Pennsylvania. And now I'm in multifamily, and all of my multifamily properties are out of state. I personally think that we live in an age where you can accomplish anything you can set your mind to it. And investing out of state is one of those accomplishments that I know you can accomplish. David Green wrote an excellent book that you can buy on BiggerPockets, and it covers how to invest out of state. It's Long Distance Real Estate Investing by David Green, and you can get it at BiggerPockets. But that covers the fundamentals of every single component you need to be successful at real estate investing. David Green has a very amazing talent of succinctly putting together an outline of what you need to do, and you can literally replicate what he tells you to do, and you can find success. So I highly recommend reading that book. It was an excellent book, and it mirrored perfectly as what I was doing when I was flipping houses. That has led me to be able to tackle these multifamily properties out of state. Sure, you need to have somebody who serves as boots on the ground, but you can figure out all those different players. You don't need to be the person who is the boots on the ground. You can leverage other people's time, their geographical location. There's so many things that you can put together and really partner. I think I've said the word partner maybe 30 times in the past 5 minutes. So I hope it's very clear that partnering is truly, excuse me, the path to success in multifamily, and to be honest with you, in real estate in general. I've been investing for 10 years, and I started partnering a few years in. Just imagine where I would be if I had partnered just a few years earlier. Partnering is really the key to success when you're investing in real estate. So good luck, Conquer. I wish you the best of luck. And once again, thank you so much for your service. What is my opinion about keeping a 9 to 5 while you invest out of state? Excellent question. There is a balance between how much you actively want to invest versus how time consuming your W 2 is. I think one thing you have to be honest with yourself about is your capacity to do both. And at the end of the day, there are only so many hours in a day. It is not impossible to do both, but in terms of committing yourself to be able to execute at a high level, which I'm sure you want to do, you need to ensure that you do not overcommit yourself on either side. So, not on your W 2 as well as not on your investing. Ultimately, if you're using investing as a vehicle to get out of your W 2, there are going to be times where you're working evenings and weekends on your investing business to launch you out of your W 2. Ultimately, there is a balance there, but I think that any full time real estate investor that you speak to has gone through those challenges before. So there is a way that you can do it. Just make sure you know your limitations. Thank you so much for your question. How do you come up with a clause when partnering with someone to do multifamily? Excellent question, Terrence. With partnering, the best way to establish a true partnership with someone is to lay out expectations from the very beginning. You want to ensure that it's very clear what your responsibilities are versus what your partner's responsibilities are, and that is documented in writing. A lot of people do not have the luxury of having a lawyer put together a partnership agreement. So they often think, well, we'll verbally commit to this. I don't think that is the solution here. If you do not have the financial means to put together an agreement with a lawyer at the onset, I think it is a good idea to still write out something between the two of you that you both sign, you both have a copy of, and when you have the opportunity to involve a lawyer later down the road, you get a lawyer in and you can redo the contract. But at the end of the day, people remember things differently, and it's very important that whatever you decide to do with a partner, that it is documented and it is clearly stated. I partner with one business with my father, and we have a document. And this is my own father. We have an excellent relationship. We've never had an issue. We're in business together. We're clearly family. But at the end of the day, we still have an agreement. So we know what expectations each other have of one another. So if I'm doing that with my father, I think it's a good idea that people do it with friends, acquaintances, people they don't know, anyone that you want to go into business with. It never hurts to have something in writing. Thank you again, Terrence, for your question. So I'm going to probably take about 2 more questions and then I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank you again for attending tonight. Make sure to like and share. And I hope to see you next Tuesday night, where we're going to go into a little bit deeper on multifamily. We're going to talk about building teams. I'm going to get into Terrence's question a little bit further than what we covered tonight. But really, it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you all tonight. And I hope tonight has provided some excellent value. So, last two questions. Here we go. What bank or lender do you use for multifamily? Andreas, this is an awesome question. And there is not a straightforward answer I can give you because it depends. And I know a lot of people hate when you say that, but that's actually a good thing in multifamily because the way that the deal is structured, you want to ensure that you match a lender that works well with that deal. So what do I mean by that? A stabilized asset that has an above 90% occupancy can secure a Fannie or Freddie Mac loan, whereas a property that's either in lease up, it's needs a renovation, which in the multifamily world is called value add. That type of property typically falls under what's called a bridge loan. So there are all different types of loans. And because of that, you have to be cognizant of that in your underwriting because the rate at the loan to value that a lender will provide for you, whether or not construction costs can be wrapped into the loan, that's another consideration to have. The terms, the loan terms, there are so many nuances to loans and there's so many different opportunities that falls into the bucket of why multifamily is so creative. So that there's no one bank that I go to for multifamily. It's not like single family. Single family, they pretty much have a script in which all banks are using, and they're off by a couple hundred basis points here or there. But in totality, they're offering the same option. In multifamily, it is completely different. And it really depends on the deal, what loan is the most advantageous for the property and the business plan that you want to execute, which is really critical because depending on the strategy you have for the property, whether you want to own the property for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that could also change the type of loan that you're seeking. So thank you so much for your question, Andres. So we have time for one more question. What's this question? Any tips on small syndication to invest in multifamily? Let me see if I understand this question. Any tips on small syndication to invest in multifamily? I'm not sure if I understand the question here, so I think I'm going to take a guess at what you mean here. But in terms of syndication of multifamily on smaller properties, you can syndicate anything. Let's start there. So it doesn't have to be a large multifamily property. I think in the real estate world, we hear syndication and we just naturally jump to large multifamily. But you can syndicate self-storage. You can syndicate small multifamily. You can do syndication outside of real estate. Most people often think of that as crowdfunding. So on small multifamily property, you have the same freedom to do syndication or not. It's really up to you. There are other options too, which most often are referred to as partnerships or joint ventures. That's another way you can do it. And syndication really is in reference to the number of passive investors that you are having come into a property or an acquisition. But if you have a small multifamily, you might only need one partner, and then you might want to go a joint venture route, or which is just 2 people. It can be more people. This is beyond my pay grade. This is something for a syndication attorney to speak on a little bit further. But there are a lot of different options on ways in which you can partner to acquire smaller multifamily properties. So, Dwayne, I hope I answered your question correctly. If not, make sure to just send me a message on Instagram and I will answer it right away for you. With that, I want to thank you again, everyone, for joining. This was definitely fun to be back. I haven't been doing the live stream for a few years, so I was probably a little bit rusty tonight, but I hope there was still value in the content that I delivered. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. And once again, shameless request, but I would love if you could like, share, and subscribe to this to let everyone at BiggerPockets know that this is something that you value and will continue to deliver excellent quality content on multifamily. So with that, have a great night. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.